Welcome everybody to the little things, and I call it the little things because I'm going to define here in a minute what the big things in nature photography are, and then but I think the one of the things that makes a lot of difference in your pictures are those little things that you think about each and every time, and like I say here in nature photography, details matter, and so we're going to talk about some of those details that I try to pay attention to every single time I go out and take pictures, and I think it makes a big difference. Like I said, or if you don't know who I am, my name's Russell Graves. I'm coming to you live from Hackberry Farm, Dodge City, Texas. Uh, Getting ready to go out on our next workshop pretty soon. We're going to be in the Netherlands, and so I'm pretty excited about that one. In the meantime, just enjoying a beautiful spring day here on the farm and enjoying the time I'm going to spend with you guys. And so bear with me. We still got people wanting to come in here. So, all right, as we get started, speaking of the Netherlands, there's some of the tulips from last year. Just a beautiful, beautiful place. I can't say enough good things about the Netherlands. If you've never been, whether you go with me or go on your own or go with someone else, you need to. If you love flowers and you love just a really well put together country, that's the place to go to. All right. In this webinar, you're going to learn a few things. Number one, you're going to look at. We're going to tell you about five sometimes overlooked aspects in the practice of nature photography. Like I said, I'll call them the little things, but there really are big things. Uh, and then better than that, practical advice on how you can utilize some of these things into your photography. So I'm always trying to be big on that. I always tell you, try to identify what the issue is or the problem is, and then I also want to give you some concrete solutions that you can add to your toolbox as soon as we get off this webinar. You can put these things into practice and immediately start making a difference on how your pictures look. Now, here's the thing I think about all the time when I think about webinars and doing educational stuff. When it comes to photography, there's there's an infinite number of pictures you can take. There's an infinite number of scenes you can see. Everyone has their own vision of what things ought to look like. But when it comes to the nuts and bolts photography, there's really I'm not going to say it's completely finite, but it's pretty close to a finite number you can think about. Kind of that nuts and bolts, sort of the how does aperture work? How does shutter speed work? How does ISO work? The exposure triangle. How do all those things work in concert together? There's only so many ways you can go over that. So a lot of the things that I talk about, this one included, this topic included, is uh, sort of a mindset. Sort of, these are going to be some specific things, but also sort of a mindset to help you think about taking pictures differently. That's really for me that that's been key for me as I've grown through my photographic journey over the years is the way I used to think about what a good picture looked like in the beginning has morphed over time. And is the way that is your definition of a good picture morphs and the things you need to do to make that good picture morphs, all of a sudden you start developing what, artists know as a style. When people look at your pictures, there's a few key indicators that, just like when speaking of the Netherlands, when you look at a Dutch painter like Rembrandt, you can kind of see by his style and be able to tell that that may be a Rembrandt photo. And it's the same way with photographers as you develop a certain style and a certain look of pictures and you repeat those same things over and over again. That's where, that's where your style starts to shine through. And so in that vein, that's some of the things we're going to talk about today, or some of the things that I do uh, from a practical standpoint and a stylistic standpoint, some of the things that I do to kind of lend that style look to my photos. Not to say you've got to copy the way I do things, but again, just a different way of thinking about some of these things and some of the behind the scenes look at some of the things that I do and the secret sauce that I do to put together some of my pictures. And of course, when we do workshops, some of the things I try to coach people on if they're looking for some different suggestions or coaching ideas on how to make their pictures stand out a little bit. And I got a few bonus tips for you in the end. So I start with five little things you're going to learn, but as I went through this, I have a few other bonus tips I'll share with you. Still got people coming in, so I'll pause every now and then and let those folks in. So in nature photography, paying attention to the small details often pays big dividends. And in a picture like this, I mean, I've taken a lot of pictures of burrowing owls before. This is in Florida. one of the small things I paid attention to, and I'll talk about this a little bit in a minute, is just the angle that you in which you shoot the picture. That's a huge thing. On this one, I used all the technology I have in terms of a articulating screen on the back. Got the camera as low as I could get it to try to get eye level with these owls, which by the way, they're only about that tall, and really tried to pay attention to those small things like, the angle of the camera to the bird and the background and the lighting and all those things. And those small things add up and they pay big dividends in the end. If you've ever if you've ever entered a photography contest, you'll know a lot of times when it comes down to picking the final pictures and who the winners are, you're really slicing hairs and you're to try to splitting hairs to try to see who, to try to pick one picture over another and which is best. And a lot of times it's some of these details that we're going to be talking about. As always, I just like to show pictures in between time to kind of give me a moment to regroup my thoughts and think about things. These are all pictures from various workshops we did last year, except for the owl that was here on the farm last year. And it's getting to be owl season again, and the owls are starting to come out, so we're pretty excited about that. And so before I talk about the little things that this webinar is about, let's talk about the big things. And the big things in my mind that everybody should know when you get to a certain level of advancement of photography. Now, if you're brand new to it, I don't expect anybody to know this because like everything else, photography comes with a learning curve. But as you get comfortable and you start investing in new equipment and you start investing in trips and experiences and everything else, there's a few things that I call the big things in photography that you ought to know. And number one is an understanding of exposure. How does shutter speed work? How does aperture work? How does ISO work? And how do all three work in concert together? How do you arrive at that? And it's a nebulous concept to explain. Believe me, I've tried every way in the world to come up with some simple ways of explaining some of these things. And the truth is, there's not. Everyone hears things differently. Everyone understands things differently. And it's hard to come up with a one size fits all explanation of the way of why if you're talking about stopping down on a lens while the number gets smaller instead of larger, why opening up is a smaller number, stepping down is a smaller number. It's some of those things. I've often jokingly said if I can ever invent a time machine, the first thing I'm going to do is go back and find the guy that invented all these photography terms and give him a good talking to in the end. Uh, just because some of these things that we talk about can be a little confusing. But at some point, everyone gets to the point where they understand exposure. They understand what's going to happen when you change the aperture on the lens. They understand, what shutter speed you should use to capture birds in flight or to capture slow water moving. And then they understand they have a good concept of ISO to get the highest quality pictures. And so these are the big things again. No, number two, an understanding of composition. Now, I watched the Masters yesterday. I've always been a fan of that golf tournament, and I try to watch at least the final round every year. And I watched a little bit of it yesterday, and it doubles down with what I've always said about photography, nature photography in general. It's like golf in the sense that the greatest golfers in the world play the game, and none of them played it perfectly yesterday. Some of them got close, but none of them played it completely perfectly. Uh, and so we play the game knowing that you'll never master composition. You may get better at it. And I certainly have gotten better at it, especially when it comes to composition of not only wildlife photos, but people in nature photos and landscape photography and all that. But there's still some things I struggle with from time to time, but at least have an understanding of composition. And I kind of know where to start when I find myself in the area and I'm getting ready to take pictures. So that's what I mean by understanding composition. And then proper camera handling techniques. There's a right way and a wrong way to hold your camera. Uh, and I'm going to be a dinosaur on this topic one of these days, but I still believe the best way to hold a camera is using a tripod, especially if you're using a telephoto lens. If you're shooting wide angle lenses and you're doing landscape photography, I think there's another reason you should use a tripod is that it helps slow you down and think about compositional things. But there's a right way and a wrong way to hold a camera. If you're hand holding it, there's a proper way of, we've all learned to cradle your left hand underneath the lens to give it support, keep your elbows in. So that's another big thing of understanding. And then knowing camera operations. This is different for every camera. I'm an advocate of telling people You don't have to know everything your camera will do. In fact, on my, these cameras that we use now, these mirrorless cameras are technological wonders. But if you've got a pretty good understanding of the things you use the most and where to find them and how to change it from continuous autofocus to spot autofocus, or how to change it your focus point, or how to change it from uh, uh, just a single picture to burst mode, and understand all those camera operations. That's a big thing too. I think, especially if you're going out taking pictures of a variety of things, it's important to know how your camera operates. Don't have to know everything it does. Like there's some things on my camera I have no clue, and I keep telling myself I'm going to have to look that up and see what that means. But there's a few things on my camera I have no clue what it means just because I don't use it, so there's no point in me wasting time to figure it out. Now, there's some other things I kind of use on the periphery. Focus stacking, I know how to do that. HDR when I need it and all those things. So there's a few things that I keep on the periphery I know how to do, but the basics of the camera operation, knowing how to change modes, knowing how to change all the basic settings in your camera is big as well. And then I think this is big too, a consistent post-processing workflow. Every time I bring my pictures into the computer after I'm home on a shoot, about 90% of them get the exact same thing done to them each and every time. I mean, it's just pretty consistent. So I know I'm going to hit auto. I'm probably going to have to adjust the exposure and the blacks and the whites a little bit. And then after that, there's not a whole lot else that goes on, but it's just a consistent workflow that I do every single time. That way, when you're in the field, it helps you predict what you can do in post-processing, so you can be able to know, can I capture this picture and make it look good in the end? And then number two, you get better at taking pictures by going out and taking pictures. And so a consistent post-processing workflow means you got a good starting point, you got a good ending point, and you kind of know what you're going to do from there. And a lot of people have that already. And the post-processing workflow is it's one of those things that everybody does it different. No one necessarily does it right or wrong. There's just everyone's different way of doing it, and so I think there's some space to understand that as well. This was a beautiful morning out at Death Valley National Park. When we went out there this year, we really hit it good because the uh, Super Bloom was underway because it had an ample amount of rain in the wintertime. And then Badwater Basin, the lowest point in the national park and in the continental U.S., was now Lake Manly because it had water in it. So we were able to get some beautiful reflections, and just a lot of good things went on with that particular trip.
Russell,
Hey,
I'm not seeing any of your pictures. I'm just seeing you.
uh-oh, I'm not sure why that's going on because when we did a check earlier, everyone was
We're
seeing
still, yeah, I've still got your
I've
presentation.
got your pictures.
Okay,
I can see your screen.
okay. Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on there. So, uh, yeah, I'm not sure.
Suggest
I
you
can
log
see
in
your
again.
pictures. It's
Yeah,
Carolyn.
maybe
Thanks.
maybe log off and log back in. Whoever said that you couldn't see the pictures, so maybe try that.
It's Lee Hatfield.
Okay.
Couldn't,
Yeah.
can't see him.
Huh.
All right,
Oh,
I'll log off and come back on.
okay. All right. Number one, little thing, watch the edges. And I have to remind myself of this all the time. And what I mean by watch the edges is when you're taking a landscape picture, a wildlife picture, I've always got to be mindful of making sure that little things aren't creeping in from the side. And I say this here, when composing image, try to avoid extraneous objects creeping into the edge of the frame, things like limb, out of place rocks, etc. When I judge contests, you'd be surprised at how much I see this a lot. And so a lot of the things I'll talk about, the little things, are just things I've experienced that every one of them I've done myself. So I'm not going to say I'm so good at what we're talking about today that that I've never done these myself. I've done them all myself. And so when we when we're composing images, just be on the lookout of all those little extra little things kind of creeping into the frame, like another animal that you're going to chop off, or like a limb or a rock that kind of looks like out of place. I'm going to show you some examples in a minute where I'll chop rocks off, or you may chop a tree off, or whatever. But it's kind of hard for me to explain. But there's a balance, and so this is the way I like when I do landscape images. I like really clean edges where the sky is where the sky is supposed to be, the ground is where the ground's supposed to be. This is at White Sands National Park, by the way. uh, and just have it really clean looking, So when you compose something like this, there's yuccas everywhere out there. So you're making sure there's no yuccas kind of sticking into the picture. You're making sure that, all the angles of the light are right. You're just making sure that it's got a really clean kind of background around it. This was in a Acadia National Park. And again, because of just the way the rocks on the bottom balance with the shadows of the mountains in the background, and we got that little bit of color. That's why I made the compositional choice there. But if you notice that very bottom rock, I really tried carefully not to cut it off. But some of the rocks are cut off. Sometimes you got to make those choices. And the best thing I know to tell you is when you're making those choices, just kind of do what looks natural. But if you look at the rest of this frame, the water's clean, the mountains are clean. There's not anything just inadvertently sticking in from the side.